On behalf of the Souris and Glenwood Chamber of Commerce, I would like to welcome you all to our event this evening. Thank you to WCG-TV Souris and the Avalon Theatre for their partnership in tonight's forum, and Sept Entertainment for the sound. Thank you to Michelle and Grant for joining us. Melissa sends her regrets. I would like to begin with acknowledging that the municipality of Souris-Glenwood is located on Treaty 2 land, the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nations. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. It is with great respect that we recognize the inherited state of relationships, and we commit to moving forward in a way that brightens the future of all Canadians as equals. I will now turn things over to Laura Higgs from WCG-TV Souris, who will be our moderator for this evening.
Thank you, Loretta. First off, let's do some housekeeping here. Make sure your cell phones are on silent or turned off, please, as to decrease the chances of being interrupted. This event will be taped by WCG-TV Souris and available in the following days on the YouTube channel, Access TV, and the Facebook page. The flashcard or flag will be held up by the timer. Loretta will be our timer today, to notify the speaker that there's only 30 seconds left for them to speak. A bell will ding when the time is up. These questions have been provided to all candidates prior to the event to prepare their responses. And each candidate will have a maximum of 2 minutes to respond to each question. The candidates are allowed one rebuttal throughout this event. That rebuttal, if the candidate requires a rebuttal, they will raise a yellow card. And after the first candidate is finished, they will get 30 seconds to present their rebuttal. And then the candidate will be able to have 30 seconds to respond. If time permits, there could be questions from the floor. These questions will have to be pre-approved by the Souris and Glenwood Chamber of Commerce to ensure that they are appropriate in nature. Please see Jackie Kirkup if you wish to present a question. I would like to have probably a break around 8 o'clock. If we're going to be running overtime, we'll give everybody a chance to take a breather around the 8 o'clock mark. Within our advertising of the event, we have stated that we will not tolerate disrespectful behavior towards members, volunteers, and candidates. We have 20 questions prepared covering the topics of economy and jobs, healthcare, education, infrastructure, crime and small business, and taxation. Each candidate will be given a chance to start 10 of the questions, so they'll be taking turns in random order. Now, let me start with our introduction. On my right, the far right, is Michelle Badowski for the Manitoba Liberal Party. Michelle, you have 2 minutes to tell people about yourself. And
Perfect. You can hear me, all right. My name is Michelle Badowski. I live in Rivers, Manitoba. I've been there for 18 years, but many of you may have seen me in Souris in the community many times, including on my platform, Real Westman. So Souris is one of my favorite towns, and I love working with local businesses and local organizations, and have volunteered and worked here many times over the last few years. Now, I am going to address, we were asked to prepare a statement introducing how we and our party want to work with our riding and our communities into the future. But I'm going to say this outright. I know, because I can read polls, that the Manitoba Liberal Party will not be forming government. But what we can do as an individual MLA is work really closely with our communities and the people in our communities to affect change in that government. So regardless, one of the best things about being a centrist is that I can work across party lines. So regardless of which government forms government, or whether or not there's a minority, our voice here in Spruce Woods and in all of Westman will be heard. That is one promise I guarantee.
Thank you, Michelle. And on my near right here, we have Grant Jackson, who is with the Manitoba Progressive Conservative Party. Grant, you have 2 minutes to share with people about yourself and why you're here.
Perfect. Thanks, Laura. Better turn that on. Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Loretta and the Souris and Glenwood Chamber of Commerce for putting on this forum here today. My name's Grant Jackson. I am no stranger to most of you here in this room, born and raised in this community, and Souris has always been home for me. I'm your Progressive Conservative candidate. I won a contested nomination for this riding back in February, and since then I've been out and about in this constituency, connecting with residents all the way from Rivers and Oak Lake east to Holland and on the North Hill of Brandon to learn about the priorities and make sure that I'm out connecting with as many folks from this great constituency as possible. I'm very passionate about this town in particular, as well as all the communities in this southwestern corner of the province. This is certainly home, and home is where the heart is, and I want to see this region grow and thrive. And so I think our Progressive Conservative team has an excellent platform that's talking about bringing more training programs to Brandon University and Assiniboine Community College, that's talking about reducing the tax burden both on families and businesses in order to thrive and create growth for our region that we haven't seen in perhaps a very long time. So I'm very excited about the possibilities that we have here in Spruce Woods, in Souris, in southwestern Manitoba, and I'm really excited to be your Progressive Conservative candidate, bringing a younger, fresher perspective to party politics, to this region, and really excited to continue this discussion throughout the evening.
Thank you, Grant. Now we'll start with our first 4 questions, our economy and jobs. I have this little bowl beside me and it's got poker chips in it. And I get to pull out randomly and then the folks will be able to start. And like I said, you'll each get a chance to start 10 questions, okay? So, number 1, throughout the election campaign, leaders of all parties have talked about the importance of Manitoba's growing economy. How is your plan different from the other parties, and what does economic prosperity mean to you?
It's red, it must be
It's
me.
red. Michelle starts.
I think what's different, and I'm going to go back to my opening statement. I think one of the things that I love about the Manitoba Liberal Party, and we do have a very good platform. We've got a fully costed, fully released platform. It's available in the front. You can download it. It's a great platform that has been developed with and in collaboration with local organizations, business people, healthcare workers. It's just great. But one of the great things I have that I bring to this table is not just my history of working in economic development, in business, in this region and around the province, is my ability to step and work with and across parties. Because I'm not beholden to whoever is going to be forming government or what the party is going to do, I am free to work specifically with our individual municipalities and organizations to figure out a plan that is as unique to them as their communities are to this province. Because what is needed here in Souris, what the businesses, the people, the community in Souris needs may not be the same as what's needed in Rivers or the North Hill of Brandon. And we need the flexibility to adjust instead of having a one-size-fits-all solution, and the ability to work as independently as we can so that when we go to Winnipeg, when we are that voice and we act as the representative for our communities in the provincial government, we can speak for our people, not necessarily just for the platform. So that's what I bring. And with that platform, of course, is a focus on really strengthening community and business to grow and have a voice in that growth that they need.
Thank you. Grant?
Thank you. Yeah, great question. I think the question speaks to how our plan is different from the other parties. And so the Progressive Conservative Party of Manitoba has put forward a very specific and detailed plan to reduce the tax burden on our businesses, on residents and families here in Manitoba, which talks about, you know, the need to make this a more competitive jurisdiction so that we are creating more jobs here. Right now, we've committed that we will phase out the payroll tax. That's a significant barrier to successful businesses here in Manitoba. Right now, if you grow your business to a certain size, the provincial government steps in and taxes you for being successful. We don't believe in that. We believe that success should be encouraged, growth should be encouraged. Other provinces don't have this barrier, and so when you get to a certain size of business, you may choose to move south of the border. You may choose to move to Saskatchewan or Alberta or Ontario because you don't have to pay this payroll tax there. So we're going to remove that, allowing those companies that are successful to create and grow and create more jobs here. We're also going to cut your income taxes in half, letting you keep more of your hard-earned money. And you know, at different points throughout my career, I've heard from business owners that there's a significant issue when you talk about a new business idea or growing your business, which is a lack of capital. And so our government has created the Manitoba First Fund, which gives business owners the opportunity to access capital to be able to grow their businesses here at home. So that's how our plan differs from opposition parties that aren't proposing tax cuts and that aren't, you know, trying to remove those barriers to economic growth and job creation here in Manitoba.
Our next question. With several provincial offices closing in Westman, like Hydro, MASC being two of the big ones, we have also seen consolidated EMS garages, a decrease in assessment officers and water service officers, to name just a few. Many Westman RMs see these as great avenues to retain or revamp economic development. Would you put the pressure on your party to bring some of these back into rural Manitoba? Blue. Grant?
Okay, thanks, Laura. So I think these are important questions to be asking, and these are important jobs for our communities. There's no question. These are good-paying provincial jobs that are here in our communities that we're located in these physical offices. And so, you know, as times change and processes modernize, they don't need bricks and mortar locations here in many situations, but I absolutely believe that those jobs should be remaining in our rural communities. And so I will absolutely pressure the Progressive Conservative Party of Manitoba, if we form government, to make sure that when those jobs that are filled right now are retiring and coming up for a rehiring process, that there are hiring policies in place to make sure that those jobs are staying outside of the perimeter highway and in our rural communities.
Michelle.
Absolutely, we need those offices. Maybe not in every community, but within easy driving distances for our business, for our producers, and for our economic growth. You asked me how I was different about spurring economic growth. It's because after operating a small business, many small businesses in rural Manitoba, I understand that in order to operate my business, I need to reach my customers, I need staff, and I need people in my community. Those offices don't just bring jobs, they bring families, they bring people to our community, and while they're there visiting those offices, doing business, they're also shopping, they're also eating. These are areas where we need to grow in multiple areas. These are areas that we need to grow. These multiple areas are essential for economic growth because we cannot grow or attract new businesses, new families, and increase our tax base, which is what is needed to make our municipalities competitive and profitable and attractive, unless we have the services that people need when they come to those communities. So my answer, absolutely 100% yes.
Thank you. Recognizing Manitoba has one of the youngest populations in Canada and also has a large Indigenous population, do you feel they are adequately prioritized and supported in the pursuit of entrepreneurial endeavors? And if not, how will you address this? Grant, please begin.
Sure, thanks, Laura. Yeah, I think it's important. We are absolutely one of the youngest populations, and we also have a large Indigenous population here in Manitoba. This Progressive Conservative team has made some progress in working with our Indigenous partners to fuel economic growth for First Nations, but also for the province as a whole. Just a couple of examples off the top of my head include the potash mine at Harrowby, the first potash mine in Manitoba history, has ownership with Gambler First Nation. We've signed a number of revenue sharing agreements with First Nations from around the Swan Valley to talk about forestry and making sure that they're working and owning those companies that are getting in there to develop our forestry industry. We've got a brand new gold mine coming into northern Manitoba, Alamos Gold, partnering with Northern First Nations. These are just a couple of examples of how we are successfully working together with First Nations people to fuel economic growth for First Nations, but for the province as a whole as well. We have to do it working together. And for younger people, I feel the exact same way. I think there's been a lot of success, don't get me wrong, but I think there's more we can do to help out younger entrepreneurs with their ideas. That's why we've addressed a lack of capital. We need to continue to have those programs in place to help people. And as a younger candidate, I think it's time that our younger generation saw someone from their generation in elected office who understands how they grew up, who understands where they're coming from, what their challenges are that they're facing. That's who I am, and that's why I'm very excited to be representing the Progressive Conservative Party and to be a candidate in this constituency in this election.
Thank you. Michelle.
I grew up in northern Manitoba in an Indigenous community, and I started my first business at the age of 19. I understand full well the challenges not only youth, but entrepreneurs, and specifically those from Indigenous communities are facing. I've spent the last 2 years working in education for a national charity that provides remote access to education equity for Indigenous youth in remote communities across the country. And I currently am working in post-secondary, offering employment skills training and employment readiness programs in our First Nations communities surrounding Brandon in this entire province. The idea that our youth, and especially Indigenous youth, have the same opportunities as those of us in different locations or different backgrounds is something that may comfort us at night. But today is one of the first days of Truth and Reconciliation Week, and I think that in order to move forward and invite our Indigenous communities to work with us and collaborate with us, we must acknowledge Truth and Reconciliation Week. We must acknowledge that we have failed in bringing equity into education and opportunity in business with our Indigenous communities, especially those here in our surrounding neighborhoods. We must educate ourselves, respect those communities before we can ever invite them to collaborate. In March, I was the guest speaker at the Brandon Chamber of Commerce. I was the keynote speaker on indigenization in the workforce. If we want to grow our businesses, we need to put that respect and collaboration out to First Nations and our surrounding Indigenous communities and have them willing to work with us. And after we search the landfill, that might be a possibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Agriculture is the largest driver of Manitoba's economy. 1 in 3 jobs in agriculture is expected to go unfulfilled by 2029. Souris-Glenwood has been working on recruiting immigrant workers, specifically from the Ukraine, to help with these seasonal positions. But due to the current job roles, it's not possible. If elected, what will you do to address this problem? Grant, go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Laura. So I think first off, I totally agree that this is a major problem when it comes to that stat you shared about 1 in 3 jobs in agriculture being vacant by 2029. And that's why this government has prioritized the Prairie Innovation Center, ACC's Agricultural School of Excellence that they're trying to build on the North Hill campus. We need to start training more agriculture students, and we need to train them here in Western Manitoba. We don't need to send them to the U of M. We don't need to send them to the University of Saskatchewan or Lethbridge. They can be trained right here. There's no reason why they can't. So we're very excited to have invested $10 million into the planning phase of that facility, and we'll be there as a partner. The Premier committed it yesterday. We will be there as a partner once the plan is developed, and we're moving on to funding the full development of the facility. So that's priority number one. But when it comes to specifically this question about temporary foreign workers, I believe for the municipality of Souris-Glenwood, it's a challenge. I believe the specific issue that they're dealing with comes down to provincial permanent residency requirements, which are a federal responsibility. But there's no question that overall we need to revamp our provincial nominee program. It's a flagship program that puts Manitoba ahead of other provinces when we talk about immigration. We can prioritize agricultural workers through this program. We've actually introduced some meaningful changes to that program in the last sitting of the Manitoba Legislature, and I look forward to pushing those forward and getting them implemented so that this flagship program continues to improve to meet the needs of our rural communities.
Thank you, Grant. Michelle?
Excuse me. The problem with the temporary foreign worker program right now is that those temporary foreign workers for agriculture are specifically selected or need to be from Latin American countries. We need to work, I just read it this morning, but we need to work with our federal counterpart to make sure that we are, like Grant said, prioritizing this agricultural sector where we are needing those workers and where we are desperately short in this province. We need to make sure that those labor market assessments are completed, and we need to be able to provide our producers with the ability and the assistance to do that and assist them in order to get through the red tape of those programs while working to reduce it. That needs to be an absolute priority. And it's not just here, it's in all ridings in southwestern Manitoba and including the north. As Grant mentioned, the Russ Edwards School of Agriculture and Environment is going to be a huge factor in attracting international students as well. We already do that at Assiniboine Community College, and we can expand on that with the investment of completing and operating the new Prairie Innovation Center, which all parties have committed to have funding completed when and ready, to help fund it I'm trying to hold back a sneeze. To help fund it to make sure it's completed. Thank you. Pardon me. So yes, I'll just stop there.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Our next topic is health care. In order to have a strong workforce, we need a healthy workforce. It is difficult to attract employees and business to our region when we can't provide primary health care. What is your plan to address the shortage of nurses, lab techs, and support staff? We'll begin with Michelle.
Perfect, thank you. I apologize. I don't know what it is, but suddenly I've got like this sinus, uncontrollable sneezing. Healthcare in 2 minutes, not an easy thing to do. But I have been very vocal about our need to work with our local healthcare workers and get them involved in the process of determining what they need and make sure their voices are heard. One of the main issues that I'm hearing when I'm talking to healthcare workers is that they don't have enough say in what's going on with their own careers. And that's something that we need to prioritize and make sure that Prairie Mountain Health and the provincial government are listening. I said this the other night and I stand by it. When you have a mass exodus of employees leaving an organization, that is not a funding issue, that's a leadership issue. And we need to address it. We need to look at training in community with programs like Assiniboine Community College and utilizing the experience that Brandon University has with their Northern Teacher Education Program and start training healthcare workers in community. Because the closer people can get educated and ready to work to the place they're going to work, the more likely they are going to stay. Funding agency workers to rotate, where they are going to leave the public system only to make more money and have more flexible options, is a prime example of what's not working in our system. And it's also costing us more. So we need to look at those reasons. We need to talk to the workers. We also need to make sure that they have retention bonuses for those that have chosen to stay in public, and a bonus to return into the public system for those that have left.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant?
Yeah, thanks very much, Laura. And so I agree that we need to train more locally. That is absolutely what I want to prioritize if I'm elected on October 3rd. This progressive conservative government added 400 new nursing seats to post-secondary institutions across the province. About 70 or 80 of those were at the two institutions in Brandon, both at ACC and at Brandon University. I'd like to see even more. I'm glad to see some were in Brandon, don't get me wrong, but I'd like to see even more nurses trained in Brandon to meet the gaps that are in Prairie Mountain Health when it comes to nursing positions. I'd also like to look with those post-secondary institutions about the other professions that you mentioned in this question, being healthcare aides and lab techs as well. Do an assessment of how many were short and how many more seats it would take to fill these positions. Should this have been done 10 years ago? Absolutely. They should have been boosted 10 years ago. They weren't. They've been boosted now. It takes 2 to 4 years to train a nurse, and I'm just eagerly awaiting getting these larger grad classes out there so that we can start addressing some of these gaps in our system. I think overall, though, I agree that we need to take a more comprehensive look at what our frontline staff are dealing with. I think the MLA can play a bigger role in that. I've met with current healthcare workers, retired healthcare workers. I want to continue doing that if I'm fortunate enough to be elected as your MLA, and to make sure that their voices are heard directly in the Manitoba legislature.
Thank you, Grant. There is a huge concern regarding the lack of paramedics and the huge area that they cover in our rural communities. What is your plan to address these issues? We'll start with Michelle.
Awesome. In 2004, before I moved down here, I was a volunteer EMR for the Cranberry Portage Ambulance Service in Cranberry Portage, obviously, which was an hour from Flin Flon and in between Flin Flon and the Pas. I would have done my EMT training if it was available to me closer than Winnipeg. We need to not only prioritize training outside of Winnipeg through our post-secondaries and working with a potential collaboration and partnership between the emergency colleges or the emergency college and ACC, and develop a school for public safety so that we can actually be training people here and again in community. We also need to make sure that our paramedics are well respected, well compensated, and don't have to struggle for the resources that they need to do their job. Because one of the reasons we're losing people isn't just because of the pay, isn't just because of the open seats, but it's because of the actual work. People are leaving the profession for multiple reasons: lack of respect, frustration over no union agreements. These are the issues that we need to address so that we can fill the seats that are there with people that really want to do the job. Because people that go into these professions are not doing it because they don't want to help people. They're doing it because they care. And I'm telling you, those people working in emergency services are a different breed. They will put their lives on the line for us. And we need to make sure they're supported, respected, yes, compensated, but also treated with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And you may hear some repetition here, and that's good that we agree on a few things. So I absolutely do agree that we need to train more locally in order to address this gap. That means paramedic programs, as Michelle's talking about, not just at Red River Community College in Winnipeg, but outside the perimeter highway as well. And once those are established, we have to work to make sure that the seats are filled, which means working with our municipal partners, working with the heads of schools and school divisions who know the local kids, who are those types of people who might be interested in these careers, to recruit them from high school into these programs to make sure the seats are filled and addressing these gaps in our system. I also agree with Michelle that it is a compensation issue from, certainly from the people that I'm hearing from. It's taken way too long for a number of these union deals to be signed. Absolutely, there was a expenditure issue in 2016 when the PCs came to government, but it's taken 4 or 5 years without a contract is totally unacceptable to me. And so we have to get down to the negotiating table. We have to be fair and respectful at the bargaining table. Get these healthcare workers who are our frontline caregivers a fair deal so that they can, feel that they are respected and dignified in the workplace, while also compensating them appropriately so that these careers are attractive for people to actually want to give up their evenings, their weekends to perform these services for our rural communities. So that's certainly something that I would prioritize. I know this new premier, since she came in, has now got about 90% of healthcare workers in contract. We haven't got all the way there. We've made a lot of progress in a year and a half, and I won't stop until we've got all the way there.
Thank you, Grant. Our next question. QDoc exists and is a great entrepreneurial approach to helping the physician shortage, but it doesn't replace the need to access a family practitioner or an emergency room. What is your party going to do to help address the need for physicians? We'll begin with Grant.
Sure, thanks very much. I agree with the statement and the question that QDoc is certainly an innovative and entrepreneurial approach that's dealing with some remote and distance issues in rural healthcare, but it doesn't replace a family physician. So this year alone, we had the largest med class taken at the University of Manitoba's med school, 125 or 127 grads, up from I think about 80 when this government took office in 2016. So that's a record level of doctors being trained in Manitoba. We also have to have the appropriate incentives for them to want to practice here after they get out of med school. So we've just recently signed a new deal with Doctors Manitoba just before the writ drop. The feedback I've read from Doctors Manitoba is quite positive, as well as a number of doctors whose doors I've knocked on, quite positive, particularly about the progress that was made on barriers to family practice, which we know is a struggle. And so I'm optimistic based on that feedback. It's a 6-week-old deal. We've got to give it time to work and then reassess quickly, make sure that we're addressing any additional barriers that are out there and keep moving that needle forward. But we certainly have taken steps to attract med grads to family practice, and we'll continue to make progress on that front.
Good. Thank you, Grant. Michelle?
One of the things that the Manitoba Liberal Party has done is already worked with both ACC, Brandon University, and the City of Brandon to work out the details of what it would cost and how it would work to bring a satellite medical school to Brandon University out of Winnipeg. Through that medical school, we could not only train more doctors in the province, we could train them here in Westman, but also, as I mentioned earlier, utilizing Brandon University's decades of experience of in-community training for their teacher program to train medical staff in rural and remote communities. Manitoba has 400 doctors that we need just to make the national average, and that's not including the doctors that we're going to continue to lose. This is an absolute priority. It's a health emergency for this province. We need to focus on this. We also need to look at ways to keep doctors operating as family physicians, and that includes changing the way that they're paid. We need to give them stabilized payment options so that they have the flexibility to spend more time with the patients that need it, so they can give the quality of care that they went into the profession to give. No one went to medical school to become a doctor to spend 5 minutes with a patient to diagnose them. So we need to look at that option. We also need to work on not just family medicine, but urgent care, and especially in rural communities, making sure that we have those retentions. Our municipalities have done a great job in recruiting and giving bonuses and fundraising to attract doctors. That's not the job of the municipality, and it's certainly not the job of the residents of the community. That's the provincial government's job, and we need to start doing it, and we need to start doing it now.
Thank you, Michelle. Our final question is, for this area, is please outline how your party will work with all facets of our healthcare system to grow and retain the human capital required to staff our emergency rooms, hospitals, and ambulances. Is a satellite medical school at Brandon University on your radar?
Sure, thank you. Yes, it absolutely is on my radar. In fact, I think discussions have actually already started happening between U of M, BU, and Shared Health as well about the feasibility and the plan to scope out how this may or may not work. So I look forward to seeing their work. I mean, these are the folks who are experts in actually delivering post-secondary education, so we don't want to do it in isolation from them. But I certainly look very much forward to seeing their plan for how this could work, and would absolutely be supportive of a med school satellite campus coming to Brandon University or shared between BU and ACC, should that be possible going forward. So absolutely would support that and advocate on that particular facility's behalf.
Thank you, Grant. Michelle?
As I mentioned, the Brandon Satellite Medical School was released in the Manitoba Liberal platform months ago. Not another party has discussed it until tonight. But it is something we need. It is something we absolutely have to do. But we also can't stop there. We need to tie in our nurse practitioners. We need to tie in our EMS. Here in rural Manitoba, we are in crisis. If we actually work to bridge the gap between the types of care that our EMS can provide, we can actually reduce the impact on our healthcare system and our ERs. For example, for those of us who are getting older and maybe eventually thinking about palliative care, if we can train and license our EMTs to give life-saving help at home, if that's what we choose, things like catheter flushes or PICC replacements, things like that, they can actually respond to a palliative call in one of our communities, administer what they need to administer, provide comfort without moving that patient through the ambulance into the hospital. They could save time, they could save money, and they can increase the quality of care that our residents are getting with a simple change to their training and licensing. These are innovative ways that we can actually work with wraparound care that are working in other areas, Interlake, OCN. These are not Manitoba Liberal ideas, these are healthcare worker ideas, and we need to listen to the people doing the job because they know what the solution is.
Thank you, Michelle. We have a few questions in the education area. How will you ensure the education system is supporting and properly preparing our secondary students for entry into post-secondary education? Michelle, would you like to begin?
Absolutely. I love this question. When I was growing up in the North, post-secondary was not an option for me, for a myriad of reasons, but mainly because no one ever told me I could go to post-secondary. There were just certain students that were expected to go to university and certain students that weren't, and I was in the weren't category. We need to not only make sure that our students are prepared educationally, but that they are prepared socially, that they see themselves as represented in every area of life, that they see themselves as doctors, lawyers, nurses, politicians, tradespeople, that they see what they could be in that possibility. In order to do that, we need to make sure our teachers and our schools are supported. When we continue to ask our teachers to do more with less, when we are taking away resources, funding, and we are freezing what they can and cannot do in the classroom, we are not allowing them to do the job that they are trained and hired to do. So in order to prepare our students, we need to support our teachers. We also need to look at the education gaps. We want equitable education, so regardless of who your parents were, how much money you have, or the postal code you have, you do have the same opportunities and access to education that every other Manitoban has, because that is what makes Manitoba great, and we have the technology to do that. All we need now is the political will.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, so I think it's important. The question is about education system supporting and properly preparing secondary students to enter into post-secondary education. And so, you know, I agree that our curriculum has to be competitive with other provinces. We have to make sure that what Manitoba students are learning is exactly the same or better, if possible, than they're learning in other provinces across the country. When this government came to power in 2016, our outcomes from the secondary school system were the worst in the country in math, science, and ELA. Now we've moved a little bit up the ladder, but we're still not far enough up the ladder for my liking. I'd like us to get midway or higher through the works, and so that means that we have to give the teachers the tools they need to get our students further ahead, and so that means stronger curriculum. It also means giving them the resources that they need and making sure that those resources actually get to the classroom instead of disappearing into the administration of school divisions, which, you know, we're still funding education in this province higher than I think every other province except for one, and yet we're hearing from teachers all the time, and I hear it as I'm knocking on doors, that they're strapped for resources in the classroom. We have to get to the bottom of where that money is going and why it's not in teachers' hands in the classroom. That's exactly why this government has undertaken an education funding model review, to make sure that the education system is funded properly and also that the funding is getting where it needs to be to support our teachers and support our students to get ahead.
Thank you, Grant.
I'd like to challenge. That's my one for the night.
Thank you, Michelle. Please
I have
go
2
ahead.
points to make about Grant's statement. One is that we are continually giving education tax rebates on our property tax, which, as you say, we are losing resources in the school. That money that we are borrowing for those tax rebates could actually be going to education. That's a major concern of mine. And I know that, you know, 10 years ago was one thing, but we've had a majority government under the PC for 7 years.
Grant, you're allowed 30 seconds.
Sure. Well, almost every other province funds education through general revenue. This is an archaic way of funding education by doing it off the backs of farmers. We've said enough. That's not fair to our farmers. Let's give them their education property taxes back. Let them reinvest it into their communities, and we will fund education through general revenue, just like every other province. Every other province is doing better than we are at education, and they're funding education through general revenue. There's no reason why we can't do that here too, and why we have to do it off the backs of farmers.
Thank you. Historically, funding grants across the province have been equitable to all post-secondary institutions. These grants support the operational costs of providing high-quality education for our students who are Manitoba's future workforce. This year, the students at the institutions outside of the perimeter of Winnipeg, namely those who attend Brandon University and the Assiniboine Community College, were marginalized by inequitable funding. What does each party plan to do to create adequate and equitable operational funding for the Brandon University and the Assiniboine Community College to ensure that these institutions can continue to serve students, the Westman region, and the province as a whole? We'll begin with Michelle.
Winnipeg post-secondaries received double-digit increases in operational funding, while Brandon's got less than 4%. This is not just marginalization, it's an absolute sign of disrespect that this government has shown outside the perimeter. We need to make sure that our operational funding, we've talked about it earlier, about how we're going to be competitive, how we're going to get doctors, nurses, fix healthcare, how we're going to grow our communities. It all starts with education. It all starts with education, and if our post-secondaries are not properly funded, we can't do any of these things. We're talking about changing the way we do the system and yet not funding it properly. That needs to change, and we need to ensure we have that strong voice in the government. We also need to make sure that, while, you know what, I'm not opposed to changing how education taxes are worked or gained, but we need to make sure that our educational standards and our resources are in place before we start looking at how things are funded when we don't do a great job with how we're doing it now. We need to make sure that Brandon is no longer the poor, neglected cousin of Winnipeg, and in order to do that, we need a strong voice in government. And we have had 3 conservative MLAs during a conservative majority government, and yet this last round of funding still saw this discrepancy in our city, which affects all of our communities here, because we need those schools. We've already discussed that. Our communities need Brandon University and ACC, and we need them now, and disrespecting them with inequitable funding cannot happen again.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant?
Yeah, thanks. So this is absolutely an error that was made. This is a very specific question, so I'll give you a very specific answer. This is absolutely an error that was made by government this past year. Our Premier and our leader has apologized for it, and she's tried to address it, even though the budget was already introduced, by giving an additional $5 million to Brandon University in capital funding for the McMaster Hall renovations, and committing the $10 million to set off or try to help with this kickstart of the Prairie Innovation Center. That's not enough to address the issue, and so I firmly believe and will be advocating for a set funding model for post-secondary institutions so that they have set funding levels, and there's a formula that's fair for all institutions going forward, so that they have a guarantee of what the formula will look like when they're expecting their operating grants coming forward.
Thank you, Grant. Aligning post-secondary education with industry needs can help support economic growth and prosperity. How do you plan to foster stronger collaboration between educational institutions and industries in Manitoba to increase enrollment and ensure graduates are equipped with the skills and knowledge needed for the job market? We will begin with Michelle.
Awesome. This is literally what I do for a living right now. I work with post-secondary education and industry throughout our region. And not just big industry, small businesses, local employers, as well as nonprofits and social organizations, to determine with them what the skill gap is that their employees have, what the future of their needs are going to be, by understanding where they're coming from as a business person myself. Together, we determine what type of upskilling, reskilling, certifications, or micro-credentials they require, and we build them in collaboration with the academic schools. And if we don't offer it here, we work with academic schools outside of the province, anywhere we can get the curriculum that is needed. The provincial government needs to fund these types of programming. Right now, they are industry-driven, they are cost recovery, or they are profit centers in post-secondary. That shouldn't be. We need to make sure funding is available for post-secondaries, employers, and industries to access that type of skill building. And while there are some grants available, it needs to be permanent, and it needs to be easily accessible by industry, business owners, and operators of all sizes, so that they can get that personal attention and understanding of what their business, their community, or their municipality needs, and we can bring that training and education to them and meet them where they live.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think it's a very important question. I think the MLA can and should play a bigger role in making sure that our secondary and post-secondary institutions are connected with the business community, and making sure that they are meeting the needs and that they are aware of what the skills gaps are that they're seeing in graduates, and making sure that we're addressing them with curriculum changes, etc. So I think the MLA can play a bigger role in that and should going forward, and that's something that I'm certainly committed to do. It also also, it matters to have representation on our post-secondary institution boards, and I know this government has made a focused effort in ensuring that the provincial appointees to both the Assiniboine Community College and Brandon University boards reflect not just a diversity of individuals, but also a diversity of professional backgrounds as well, to ensure that those voices are heard representing the province and representing our business community on the governing bodies of these institutions, to ensure that there's a regular, sustained effort to make sure that they're meeting the needs of our business community, particularly when it comes to skilled trained jobs.
Thank you, Grant. We have a couple questions on infrastructure. The condition of our provincial roads and highways is concerning to our rural communities. Our region relies on commuters and strong summer tourism season where people drive into our communities. If elected, what is your plan to improve our roadways? Let's begin with Grant.
Sure, thanks. It's a short answer. Long-term sustainable funding. We've heard loud and clear throughout this new premier's leadership and then her tenure in government that the Heavy Construction Association needs long-term sustainable funding. If they're waiting until a budget is introduced in March to be able to scale up and get their staff up to start construction season in late April, that's not enough time. And so we've committed first a 3-year roadmap and now a 5-year funding guarantee, $500 million every year from now until 5 years from now, to make sure that they know that they've got that guarantee for the roads budget alone, allowing them to staff up and get more done in any given construction season. It's my commitment to get that to 10 years. I know that's what the Heavy Construction Association is asking for. I'm very passionate because I think we have to find a way to help them build capacity. So that's our plan, our progressive conservative plan, to get more highways built and bridges in any given year. And that means we also have to hold them accountable for the work they're doing. They're working faster. We've got to make sure that our roads are still a good quality. We've increased penalties as well for delayed work, etc. But we've got to make sure that we're providing them the funding guarantees that they need to make sure that they're growing their capacity and getting more roads built in any given year.
Thank you, Grant. Michelle?
I agree that long-term funding and stable funding is needed in many areas, including infrastructure. But what we don't have is that political drive to make sure that the roads, not just the roads and the highways that are feed into Winnipeg and Brandon, are prioritized, but those north-south roads like 21, 5, 34 that have been neglected for years and are almost dangerous, especially in winter, get some attention too. All the money and the funding agreements in the world are not going to get our roads and our bridges fixed if we don't have the political will to advocate for our communities outside of the perimeter. Our economic growth as a municipality, as a community, as a region, as we stated, actually as the Chamber stated, is determined by our tourism, our residents, our ability to get to our community. It's not just a matter of health and safety, it's a matter of prosperity. This needs to be a priority. I have met with municipal councils that have been trying for years to get Highway 34, Highway 5, maybe a speed zone on Highway 2 in front of Glenborough, and they have been met with deaf ears. We need an MLA who's willing to stand up and make sure our voice is heard, because that has not been happening. And again, 7 years of a progressive conservative majority government with 3 progressive conservative MLAs in this area, and our roads have not been fixed. They were neglected for years before the progressive conservatives came in, and they've been neglected since the progressive conservatives came in.
Thank you, Michelle. Our second question in the category of infrastructure is, will municipal operating funding be increased annually to match inflationary pressures? And tell us how your government will ensure the federal or provincial infrastructure grants are based on needs of aging infrastructure. And we're talking beyond roads. We'll begin with Michelle.
Awesome. As I mentioned, we need the political will to make sure our voices are heard in Winnipeg. That means a close working relationship with municipalities and getting things done. We have heard from local municipal councillors, mayors, as they shared their frustration with the lack of progress this Conservative government has made. That can't be allowed to continue, because what is going to cost us to fix a bridge or a water treatment plant today is only going to get more expensive as it goes on. And our municipalities do not have the tax base and the resource to fund those emergency services. It is bad planning to put Band-Aids on emergencies instead of working on preventative maintenance. We need to make sure not only is funding stable and tied to inflation, but that we are prioritizing the older, neglected facilities and infrastructure so that we can get them fixed now before it costs us more in the future, because that's where we are. And we need to actually start acting on it and start less talking. And that's where we need to really focus.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant?
Yeah, thank you. You know, it's certainly not lost on me as the child of a former municipal politician that the funding freeze for municipalities was extremely difficult. This new premier, when she came into office, she committed to addressing that, and she did in this last budget. So to answer the first question, will funding be increased annually to match inflationary pressure? I certainly expect to see increases for municipal governments in budgets going forward, and I will certainly be advocating on that behalf, should I be elected your MLA on October 3rd. On infrastructure funding, I absolutely think we need to prioritize aging infrastructure. The province of Manitoba was actually the first province in Canada to fully allocate its Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program allocation, which was a program from the federal government that said we'll match a third, etc. And so since then, that was 4 years ago, the answer when asked in Ottawa, how much more will the federal government help support, the answer has been silence. And so the federal government has to come to the role. We've been trying to get as much infrastructure built in this province as we can on our own since. The premiers all recognized it this summer when they met in Winnipeg. Their call to Justin Trudeau was to say, hey, we need some help. Our critical infrastructure is aging. We need your help to come to the table, not to pay for it all, but as a partner. And they got silence as a response. So I am committed to advocating on behalf of our municipalities for our aging infrastructure so that they can continue to grow, both for their businesses and their population. And that's not just advocacy in Winnipeg, it's also advocacy to Ottawa to make sure that the federal government knows that they need to be a partner in infrastructure investment here in Manitoba.
Thank you, Grant. We are just a little over halfway through, so we'd like to take a short break. Okay, let's begin with our next category, is small business and taxation. What strategies do you propose to address the impact of inflation, specifically for minimum wage earners, and how do you plan to improve the minimum wage framework to ensure it keeps pace with the rising cost of living? We'll begin with Grant.
Thanks for the question. So I think our PC team has addressed the minimum wage challenge. It was low compared to other provinces, and so we introduced a three-phase approach to raise the minimum wage. It'll be up to $15 an hour by the spring. We also, in this latest budget, raised the basic personal exemption so that people, particularly low-income earners, are earning less or are being taxed less. We raised the basic personal exemption to $15,000, which brings us a little under the middle way mark through provinces. I think there's more work to do there to ensure that folks who are making minimum wage, who are lower income earners, are paying less tax so that they're taking home more of that, more of their hard-earned money, and they can use it to pay their expenses. We also sent out a round of affordability checks this year, given that inflation is significantly impacting families. We sent out 2 different rounds of affordability payments to make sure that those families have enough to make ends meet while we get this inflationary pressure that we're in under control.
Thank you, Grant. Michelle.
One of the things that I really want to advocate for is like Grant said, reducing the tax burden on low-income workers. But that's going to take more than just increasing the personal exemption. We need to restructure our income tax, excuse me, we need to restructure income tax completely so that we have more money coming in from the top of 4% of earners over $300,000 and less coming in for those people that are earning low and middle wage or middle incomes. Asking those who are earning more to pay a little more is a fair and equitable solution here. We also want to introduce wraparound poverty reduction strategies, including increased funding for housing, mental health, and access to the barriers that are actually stopping people from seeking the education, training, and supports that they would need to raise themselves up out of poverty. By doing this, offering a tuition rebate for students, by changing the way student loans and grant programs are working so that more people can access training and education, we can empower people to raise themselves up above minimum wage, because asking employers to constantly pay more hurts small businesses. I know that firsthand. It also hurts minimum wage or medium income earners, because as we are raising minimum wage, we're not doing much for those in the middle. So by empowering people to earn more and bringing in new workers from the youth that we were talking about earlier, we can support all and just ask those with the higher wages to pay a little bit more to help offset it so that we don't have to raise taxes.
Thank you, Michelle. And now at the same time, how do you address small business concerns of feeling the increased wages affecting their bottom line? Not that they don't understand an increase for minimum wage, but the time frame to jump to these levels has really hurt small businesses.
Who are you asking?
Yeah. How do you address the small business concerns of feeling the increased wages affecting of their bottom line?
We need a color.
Sorry?
Which one of you are you asking?
That would be my job. I'm not a poker player, can you tell?
I do love the look she was giving us. Like, what's wrong with you? I think I've already spoken to, a big part of the long-term solution here. But you're right, asking employers to constantly pay more hurts, because in business, there's two realities. If you want to be successful financially, you have to spend less or earn more. So to help small businesses earn more, we need to really focus on economic development and prosperity. We need to grow our communities and give them access to the technology and the resources they need to expand beyond our local markets. We need to advocate with our federal counterparts to ensure that our communities have stable cell and internet service so that they can compete globally and they can advance their small business to the level that they want. Making sure our minimum wage earners or our low income or unskilled labor earn a living wage should not be a burden. It should be something that we as employers embrace, because the more successful our people are, the more successful our business is. But in order to do that, we need to have the capability to grow our business. And that is something that the provincial government can really focus on. And that's what I want to do as MLA, is work with those industries and our local communities to develop that capability and that capacity.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I certainly recognize that this is a burden on small businesses, and so that's why this Progressive Conservative team took a phased approach to implementing the minimum wage. There were a number of advocates who were asking for it to be raised to $15 immediately in the spring budget. including, I believe, the leader of the Liberal Party of Manitoba, who criticized the length of the phased-in approach, but that was done specifically to help our small businesses. And so there were 3 phases of the raise to get it to $15 an hour to help our small businesses cope with this large change. We also introduced a program for eligible small businesses, $500 per employee, up to a maximum of $10,000 per business. $10,000 is a lot of money for a small business, and I think it helped. We certainly heard feedback from the Retail Council of Canada and other associations that it helped small businesses and is helping them bridge through this challenging hike, shall we say, in the minimum wage. I think overall we've also got to get businesses' costs down, and my opponent here and I have sparred on this issue before, but part of the major increases in costs for small businesses, particularly in rural Manitoba, is the carbon tax. And our Progressive Conservative Party is firmly opposed to the carbon tax, and we're going to continue to fight to make sure that Manitobans get a fair shake and that they stop making life more unaffordable here in rural Manitoba.
Thank you, Grant. Our final question in the small business and taxation area is, out of these proposed taxations, PST, payroll, land transfer, and carbon tax, which 2 will your party address first to promote tax competitiveness in Manitoba? And will this strategy be adequate to attract businesses, investments, and talent to the province while maintaining a balanced budget? I will pick a poker chip now. And we'll begin with Grant.
Sure, thanks very much for the question. It's an interesting question because I'm not sure, it's certainly, we have committed as the Progressive Conservative Party to addressing various parts of all these tax measures. I'm not sure other parties have. But to answer the question, my top priorities would be removing the land transfer tax off of first-time home buyers and beginning the phase out of the payroll tax. Out of those list that you mentioned, those would be my top 2 priorities. I think the payroll tax is a significant barrier to business growth here in Manitoba. We're losing professionals, we're losing businesses to other provinces. I want to keep those businesses here, and so the payroll tax has got to go. We've got to start that in this next budget this spring, and that's what I'll be fighting for. Additionally, my generation is struggling more than ever to get into the housing market, and the costs are continuing to go up, and so our party is the only party that's committed to removing the land transfer tax from first-time home buyers to give them that little bit more accessibility to get into the housing market, to get out of rental housing, and to have the dream of owning their own home. And so those 2 initiatives I'm very excited about. They create a lot of opportunity in this province, and those would be my top 2 priorities that I will be advocating for if I'm elected on October 3rd to appear in this spring's provincial budget.
Thank you, Grant. Michelle?
Grant's right. We haven't addressed tax cuts in our platform because as long as our education system, our healthcare system, our infrastructure are underfunded and in dire need of repair, we can't afford tax cuts. This government borrowed $500 million and sent tax rebate checks. That is not solid fiscal management. I wish we could cut all the taxes, and I wish we could cut them all immediately, but that is not honest. We need tax revenue to pay for the policies and programs we are going to need to implement to get our healthcare, our infrastructure, our roads, and our education system to the level it should be. That's a reality. Once we get there, and once we get a balanced budget where we're not borrowing money just to stay afloat or give tax rebates to millionaires, then we can start looking at tax cuts. But right now, we need that revenue. That is just the simple, hard truth. I'm not concerned about the land transfer tax at this point because Manitoba has one of the highest poverty levels, one of the highest homelessness levels, including here in Spruce Woods municipality. And I think it's really disingenuous to talk about youth wanting to get into the housing market and not paying a tax, while we still have so many people that don't even have a home to go to, whether it's rented or not. Tax cuts at this time in this province should not be a priority. What we need to do to attract people and keep people here and businesses coming here is make our communities affordable and livable, but attractive with the services they need to grow and to excel.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant, you held up your rebuttal card. You have 30 seconds.
Sure,
Grant.
thanks. I just think that that's a wrong position to take very clearly. I think Manitobans need some affordability measures right now, and our government and our party have put forward a clear platform to reduce the burden on Manitobans by reducing their taxes, reducing their income taxes, helping them get into their first home. That's something I'm very passionate about for the next generation of Manitobans who are coming up, trying to build their lives here and want the dream of home ownership. So I won't apologize for that.
Thank you, Grant. Michelle, you have 30 seconds as well.
I think that the idea of tax cuts and affordability are two separate issues. Our platform and our plan of reducing costs through reducing poverty is making life more affordable. The idea that the only affordability metrics we should be using is taxes comes from a very privileged place. We need to make sure that we have long-term solutions to reduce the costs of healthcare, education, and policing with poverty reduction.
Thank you, Michelle. We also have a couple of questions in the area of crime. Crime is always a concern for rural communities. With the RCMP members faced with the extreme stress of being stretched thinner and covering more area, as well as their frustration of not being able to help their communities more due to the lack of action by the Crown, what will your plan be to support both the RCMP in the region and our communities? And we'll begin with Michelle.
Awesome, thank you. It's not just the RCMP. We have rural private police forces like the Rivers Police in our municipality. So we need to support our police. There's no sense in, I'll put it out there, we don't want to defund the police. We want to support the police. We want to make sure that they have the resources they need, and that includes assistance through mental health professionals and organizations on the ground that are working with marginalized communities to help keep them out of the criminal justice system. Long-term solutions will reduce those costs, but it will also treat the people that need it at the moment they need it. Asking our police force to deal with mental health crises is not helping them reduce crime. What it's doing is tying them up from crime, dealing with a mental health crisis that another team of professionals can work with. And we need to create this idea of homogenized wraparound care with everybody working together, like the Mobile Crisis Unit in Brandon, but expand it into rural communities as well. Almost like the Rural Crime Watch, except on a whole different level. Mobile crisis. This is one of only many ideas that we have gotten from working with people already on the ground, doing the work that we need them to do to reduce the root causes of crime. Because as long as we try to arrest, Wayne Balkett always says we can't arrest our way out of this. We can't. Unless we actually start addressing the root causes of crime, crime will always be an issue. So our focus needs to be, yes, hold people accountable for their actions, but deal with the causes so the next generation is not in the system, and we invest now for long-term savings.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with this, with the question. Rural crime is certainly a concern for me. It has been a concern. It's on the rise. And the RCMP staffing shortages are a major challenge that we're facing provincially. Our PC team has funded more than 40 new RCMP positions since we took office, but if there's no one to fill the positions, they're not doing us much good. And so our PC Justice Minister has written repeatedly to the federal Liberal government asking him to increase the number of training seats at RCMP Depot in Regina. Those requests have been met with silence. And so if we're not increasing the numbers of officers we're training, the baby boomer generation is retiring. We're not increasing the number of seats, we're not increasing the number of officers we're training, we're seeing the results of that. But until we get the federal Liberal government on board, we're not going to see increases in there. Not to mention dealing with the backlog of Depot being completely closed during the pandemic and having several years of no new grads coming out of the training program at all. So we've got to continue our relentless advocacy of the federal government to give us better results coming from RCMP Depot. And if they're unwilling to do so, then we have to look at other policing options for rural Manitoba, which, you know, I've met with the municipality of Riverdale, I've met with all the municipalities in this constituency, and there are ideas and conversations out there about a regional police model. This is something that I've committed to them, that I'm absolutely happy to work with them on developing. Municipal police forces, as we know, happen elsewhere in the province. And so if that's what the residents of our municipalities want, and those are the issues and the service that they have shared through their municipal councils that they want to receive, then the province and the local MLA need to be there as a partner to help make that happen. They have my commitment that I will be there for those discussions.
Thank you, Grant. Considering the link between substance abuse and various criminal activities, what strategies does your party intend to employ to confront the growing issue of heightened substance consumption? We'll begin with Grant.
Thanks. Our PC team created the first ever standalone department for mental health and community wellness to deal with both the mental health and addictions crises that are happening in our province right now. We also committed to creating 1,800 new treatment spaces across the province. We have now committed in this election campaign to doubling that capacity should we be re-elected on October 3rd. I am absolutely committed to seeing that Brandon gets its fair share of those services. We have a major problem on our hands in downtown Brandon, and these people do not belong in a jail cell. They do not belong in the emergency room. They need long-term, sustainable support from experienced professionals who know how to help them through their addictions challenges and into a recovery-oriented system of care. So I'm absolutely committed to building that. I'm excited about the possibilities for these expanded spaces. And Michelle and I were at an event last week where they talked about what is your vision for these services. I know from talking with service providers in downtown Brandon that a number of these people that are in Brandon's downtown are actually from the rural communities, and even though there's very little available right now in terms of service in downtown Brandon, it's still more than is available in our rural communities. And so my vision would be a hub and spoke model, and I said this last week, where we have major service providers with significant capacity in Brandon who are able to deliver these services, but they also have satellite locations in our small towns so that folks don't have to go to Brandon to get the treatment they need, that they can get it right here at home in our small communities.
Thank you, Grant. Michelle?
The majority of the people that are struggling with substance abuse disorder, and mental health issues, poverty and homelessness in Brandon that Grant referred to, over 70% of them are Indigenous. We need to make sure that our Indigenous organizations are supported with respect and dignity, and that our officials and the people that are helping to make these decisions are well educated in the true history of this country. We start with education, we work towards respect, and then we build true reconciliation and collaboration. That being said, in the past 23 years, in the past 23 years, I have worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of using and non-using addicts and their families. Addiction is a symptom of trauma. No amount of recovery spaces, no amount of services is going to work until we are ready and willing and able to deal with that trauma. In order to do that, we need to make sure that the user is alive. We need harm reduction. We need mental health. And the root cause of the vast majority of substance abuse disorder comes not only from trauma, but mental illness, poverty, a lack of treatment for domestic violence, undiagnosed learning disabilities. We know this, and yet we continue to say, just go to treatment. If it was that simple, we would have no addictions, but it's not. It requires a multi-pronged, long-term solution that is going to help people, and more importantly, keep them alive until they're ready for help.
Thank you, Michelle. We have a couple questions left just in the general category, and I want to remind you that if there was any questions that you wanted to say from the floor, they have to be passed through Jackie Kirkup here, and then we can ask them at the end. We'll go on to some general questions. Should you be elected on October 3rd, do you have a 4-year vision of how will your riding of Spruce Woods be different than it is today? For instance, what will our economic landscape look like? What new investments and strategic opportunities will your government have prioritized? We'll begin with Grant.
Thanks. I sure do have a vision for how I want to see this municipality and this constituency grow over the next 4 years. We are poised with the creation of the Manitoba Economic Development Secretariat and other economic development issues that this Premier has highlighted to see exponential growth in this province over the next 4 years. We've got, as I mentioned, the first potash mine in Manitoba's history up and running at Harrowby. We've got forestry agreements happening in the Swan Valley. We've got lithium, gold, and nickel prospecting happening like it hasn't been seen in 25 or 30 years to this level in the province right now. We've got 2 silica mines up and running in Manitoba, a third potentially on the way. We've got a company coming from Germany who's interested in producing producing solar glass panels here in Manitoba, potentially with creation of upwards of 8,000 new jobs for rural Manitoba. We've got Bunge coming to process canola at Portage la Prairie. I want to see that, but I want to see it happening here in Western Manitoba, in Spruce Woods constituency. A lot of people have expressed to me their concerns about the fact that we have part urban, part rural in this constituency. I think that positions us perfectly to be the hub of economic growth for this region, because it's going to take all of us working together, rural and urban. The city of Brandon can't grow without the surrounding rural area. The rural area can't grow without the city of Brandon. And this MLA's role can and should play a pivotal role in attracting that economic growth here, making sure we're all on the same page and rowing in the same direction so that we see growth here like never before.
Thank you, Grant. Michelle.
Absolutely. I'm going to go further than 4 years, but I'll start in the next year. I believe in the people of this riding. I believe the future of this riding is in the people. And we can talk about economic growth, we could talk about business development, we can talk about money, and we can talk about funding. But unless and until the people of this riding and this province feel like they're part of something amazing, a part of something that is growing towards something great, we are never going to bring it all together. The divisiveness we have seen in our communities, the absolute extremes we seem to be going, when we have people walking in our streets or living in our small towns that are afraid to be who they are, or they are afraid to be marched upon like we saw in the city of Brandon. Even here in Souris, we have people living in this community that are being targeted with hate. We cannot grow if our people do not feel supported and included, not just in this region, but by this government. What I envision for our riding is something bigger than money. When I started my businesses, all I wanted to do was make money. And when I realized that that wasn't getting me where I needed to be in here, I started investing in my people. And you know what? I made more money than I ever made before. Because the power of my economic growth, just like the power of the economic growth of this province, isn't in investment or funding. It's in its people. And when we all come together and are pulling together for and with everyone, that's when this province will really start to really come into its own.
Thank you, Michelle. Grant?
I think I answered that one first.
You did, yes. We'll move on to the last question of the evening. If you were elected as the MLA for Spruce Woods, what steps will you take to work openly and honestly with local municipalities and various levels of provincial government, and while keeping your constituents happy? And the last chip, poker chip, is Michelle.
Awesome. I had an interesting conversation today. I was outdoor knocking, and a woman looked at me and said, "Michelle, I don't like you." And I just smiled. She says, "You have done a lot of controversial things in this area. You have said a lot of things I don't like and I don't agree with." She says, "I voted for you yesterday because the one thing you've never done is lie to us. You've been wrong. I've been wrong a lot. And I have no problem admitting when I'm wrong. That's a part of education that I love. We're always learning new things, and when we know better, we do better. But I will never lie. I will never knowingly mislead, because that's not leadership. In everything I do, I go into it with open and honest transparency. When I started my channel, my platform, Real Westman, my TV show on WCG-TV, it was called Real Westman. Real stood for relevant, engaging, authentic, and local. Because if you're not being authentic, if you're not being who you are, there's a reason why I don't speak from notes. Because when I speak from the heart and when I'm speaking the truth, I don't need notes. I don't need to tell you how I will work with transparency and honesty if I'm elected. I will tell you I will work with transparency and honest in everything I do every single day.
Thank you, Michelle. Now, Grant, it is your turn for your final statement.
Sure, thanks very much. Absolutely committed to working openly and transparently with our municipalities. I've met with almost all of them throughout this campaign. I had also met with all of them through my competitive nomination race earlier this year. And in one of them, fairly recently, I said, well, you know what, if you folks are concerned about not having seen your MLA in the past and you want regular representation, here's my commitment to you. I'll come to your meeting quarterly if you'd like. And they kind of said, oh, that's kind of frequent. Maybe every, twice a year would be fine. But that's my commitment to municipalities. I will absolutely show up whenever they need me, whenever they want to discuss things with me, and I will work with them hand in hand to get things done on behalf of this region. So that's my commitment. I will absolutely keep my word on that, and I think we also have to balance that with the priorities of constituents, of course. I've been out door knocking since July. My opponent last week said she wasn't sure about door knocking. She's been door knocking now. That's good. But I absolutely believe in knocking on your door, showing up to your house, connecting with you on the phone, and asking you directly for your vote. I think that's how politics has been done in the past, and I think we need to get back to the grassroots as best as possible. That's my commitment to all of you, and I certainly hope that you would consider voting Progressive Conservative on October 3rd.
Thank you very much. Jackie, is there anything from the floor? Nothing at this time. Loretta, is there anything else you would like to share? Okay. I'd like to remind everybody to get out and vote. There are advanced polls, and then the election is on October the 3rd. I'd like to thank the Souris-Glenwood Chamber of Commerce, and of course in partnership with the volunteers of WCG-TV and the Avalon Theatre, for giving us this time to talk to these candidates. I'd like to thank both the candidates for coming, Michelle and Grant. Thank you so much for coming out today and joining us. And you'll see this on the YouTube and on the Facebook, and we will not edit out all the mistakes that we've made. Thank you very much. Have a great night.